In November of 1177, a boy of 16 rode out of the gates of Ascalon with a few hundred knights behind him, and by the end of that afternoon, he had broken the army of the most capable commander of the age. His name was Baldwin IV. He was the king of Jerusalem, and he had leprosy, which had already taken the feeling from half of his right arm and would kill him at 23. The disease was found by accident by a man who wrote it down. William, Archdeacon of Tyre, was the boy's tutor. He watched Baldwin playing with other children of the court, the sort of game where boys pinch and dig their nails into each other's arms to see who gives in first. The other children cried out. Baldwin bore it, in William's words, altogether too patiently, as though he felt nothing. William tested him, and his finding was precise. The right arm and that same hand, numb across about half their extent, half of one limb on one side. Not a boy who felt nothing. The retellings that say he could feel nothing overstate what the man in the room actually wrote. William understood what that meant and wrote that he could not say it without weeping. He was tutor to a 9-year-old heir who would never grow old. This is the closest thing we have to a medical record from inside the palace, written by the man who was in the room. Almost everything else about Baldwin's condition is later and further away. Leprosy in the 12th century was not only an illness. In much of Europe, it was a legal condition. A diagnosis could mean a funeral service read over a living man, and then separation from everyone he knew. The Crusader kingdoms were the exception. Jerusalem had the Order of St. Lazarus, which ran leper hospitals and fielded knights who had the disease themselves. In this one place, a man with leprosy could hold land and hold command. He was crowned at 13 in 1174. The kingdom he inherited was 88 years old, held a thin strip of coast, and depended entirely on its neighbors being divided. They had just stopped being divided. Saladin now held Egypt and Damascus, which meant the kingdom of Jerusalem was surrounded by one man instead of several. In the autumn of 1177, Saladin invaded with an army that vastly outnumbered anything the kingdom could put in the field. He had chosen his moment carefully. Most of the kingdom's fighting strength had gone north with Philip of Flanders on a campaign toward Syria. Saladin knew this. He spread his forces out to raid and moved on Jerusalem, expecting no serious opposition. Baldwin was at Ascalon with a few hundred men, cut off from the capital. By any reasonable assessment, he was finished, and Saladin treated him as an irrelevance and left him behind. That was the mistake. Baldwin came out of Ascalon, picked up the Templar garrison from Gaza on the way, and went after an army that was strung out across open country and expecting nothing. William of Tyre gives the number as 375 knights, plus whatever infantry could be gathered. He was in the kingdom when it happened and had access to the men who fought. Chroniclers on all sides inflate numbers, and his figure for Saladin's army should be treated with suspicion. His own side's count is the more reliable of the two because it is the one that makes his king look outnumbered. They carried the relic of the true cross with them. That part is solid, and it was standard practice for the kingdom's army. The scene everyone knows the dying king helped down from his horse to kneel weeping before the cross is not in William of Tyre. It is not in any source from Baldwin's lifetime. It arrives later, and it arrives because it is a better story. Somewhere near Ramla, at a place the Latin sources call Montgisard, they hit Saladin's column while it was still marching. The exact spot is not settled. There are 3 serious candidates, and the Latin and Arabic accounts may not even be naming the same feature. An army at full march is not an army. It is a long thread of men, baggage, and animals with its weapons packed. The charge went into the middle of it and cut it apart before it could form up. Saladin's army broke and ran for Egypt. The retreat killed more of them than the battle. Saladin himself got away on a racing camel and reached Cairo with a fraction of the men he set out with. Baldwin was 16 years old, and the arm that held a sword was going numb on him. He rode using his knees and his weight, which is a skill, and his own tutor called him a better horseman than his forefathers. 2 things to clear up, because they are in every retelling. The first is his name. Nobody writing at the time called him the Leper King. That is a modern label, and we are using it because you searched for it. The second is the silver mask. It is not real. It comes from a film made in 2005. No source from Baldwin's lifetime describes a mask. What the sources describe is a veil and a body failing in public over a decade. By the end, he had lost the use of his hands and feet, he was going blind, and he was carried in a litter. Command did not require him to swing a sword. It required him to be present, to be seen, and to decide. For most of his reign, he could still ride. Later, he was carried in a litter to the places where the army could see him, which was the point. He kept fighting. There was a bad defeat at Jacob's Ford in 1179, and there are truces and there is a long argument at court about who would rule after him. That argument is the thing that actually destroyed the kingdom, and it started while he was still alive. His sister Sibylla married Guy de Lusignan. Baldwin made Guy regent, watched him handle a campaign badly, and tried to strip the succession away from him. He could not make it stick, so he had Sibylla's small son crowned as co-king instead, a child of 5, to keep Guy off the throne. Then Baldwin died in the spring of 1185. The 16th of March is the date usually printed. What the sources will actually support is that he was dead by the middle of May. He was 23. The child king lasted about a year. With the boy dead, Sibylla and Guy took the crown in what amounted to a coup, staged inside Jerusalem while the man with the best claim to oppose it, Raymond of Tripoli, was elsewhere. The kingdom now had a divided high command, and a king half its nobles did not accept. Then Raynal of Châtillon attacked a caravan during a truce, which gave Saladin both a reason and an obligation to come. In July 1187, the army of Jerusalem assembled at the springs of Sepphoris. It was the largest force the kingdom had ever put together, and it was sitting on water in the hottest month of the year. Saladin besieged Tiberias, about 25 kilometers away, where Raymond of Tripoli's wife was trapped. Raymond argued to stay at the water and let the town fall. He was the one whose wife was inside it. Guy overruled him and marched the army into open country away from the springs in July toward an enemy who held every well on the road. They never reached Tiberias. Saladin's cavalry harassed the column all day and let it get far enough from the springs that going back was as far as going on. They camped that night on high ground with no water, inside a ring of men who had plenty. The sources describe an army that could hear the enemy singing. In the morning, the other side set fire to the dry summer grass upwind. The infantry, who had carried the water that ran out the day before, broke and went for the lake and were cut off from the knights. What was left was surrounded on a hill called the Horns of Hattin and destroyed in an afternoon. The true cross was captured. It was never recovered. Jerusalem surrendered on the 2nd of October, 1187. It had almost nobody left to defend it. Here the retellings soften. The city was not spared out of generosity. It was ransomed at a fixed price per person, negotiated down by Baldwin IV. Those who could pay walked out. Thousands who could not were enslaved. Saladin and his brother freed a number of them personally, which was genuine mercy, and it was mercy inside a transaction. Almost everything above comes from people with a stake in it, and it is worth knowing who they were. William of Tyre served the court he is describing. He was Baldwin's tutor, then chancellor of the kingdom, and he stops writing before the disaster. He is our best witness for the boy and the least useful for the fall because he did not live to see it. What follows in the manuscripts was continued by other hands. The accounts from the other side were written by men in Saladin's service or close to it. Imad ad-Din was his secretary. That does not make them false. It makes them a portrait commissioned by the subject. Then there is the version most people actually carry, which is younger than either. A Scottish novelist in 1825 found Saladin useful as a courteous mirror to hold up against European knights, and a film in 2005 gave Baldwin a silver mask he never wore. Both are about the century that made them. Historians have only reassessed him fairly recently. For a long time, the standard picture was a tragic invalid whose barons ruled around him. The work of the last 40 years argues something harder, that he governed and that the kingdom held while he did. What the record supports is narrower and stranger. A boy whose body was failing in front of the whole court held that kingdom together for 11 years. And Saladin never took Jerusalem while he was alive. 2 years after he died, healthy men marched its entire army away from water in July and lost it in an afternoon.